Please be aware that there are major spoilers ahead. If you have not finished the game, please do. Welcome to a brand new podcast where we dive deep into the realms of The Legend of Zelda, lore, storytelling, and magic. I'm your host, Moxie, and this is Mox Talks, the show where we connect with incredible personalities in the Zelda community. Our first guest is no stranger to the lore and legends of Hyrule. He is a prolific Japanese translator, has an amazing eye for identifying patterns throughout all 30 games in the series, and has knowledge of Zelda's past as vast as the Great Sea. Welcome, Lorulean Historian.
Woo! I'm happy you reached out and you wanted to learn a little bit more about this process and
Lore obsessed map making, ayo.
Yeah. Look up Mr. J.M. Zach on DeviantArt and then go through.
I don't think I've found your DeviantArt, honestly.
Go through.
No, sweetie, don't do it.
Okay, there we go. I have a DeviantArt somehow. I don't post anything. It's for the lurking. Okay, and then your guest series. Oh, is it the Hyrule one? Deviations?
Yeah, you can look through that one.
Oh, okay. Sir.
There used to be a lot more of them on there, and I put a bunch of them into storage because I wasn't satisfied with them anymore.
These are awesome.
Yeah.
Wow.
A lot of them were used on like Zelda Universe forums.
Yeah.
In like discussions and stuff for years. And I had no idea.
So I've been following the community, like lurking in the background since I was like 15. Like I was like, I'm 14 and this is deep, and I was in deep, like in the forums, all like, so I never felt confident enough to post, but I always read, and I remember seeing your name come up, and then I've seen, like over the years, I've seen your work pop up in so many places.
Yeah, a bunch of them got around, and I used to be somewhat involved in some of the forums back in the day, but then I kind of took a break, disappeared for a bit, and then when I came back, I decided to create my Tumblr, the Lorulean Historian Tumblr, and kind of roll from there.
Because, like, I mean, I think the most recent thing, because you were quiet for a little bit, but then, because, like, I saw you appear in, well, your work appear in Nintendo Black Crisis's ZONAI documentary. Like, that was the first time I'd heard anybody talk about the ZONAI. Like, so I've been following the ZONAI kind of closely. Reddit talked about it a lot, of course, you know, I mean, it's Reddit,
yeah.
but yeah, that was the first time I saw anybody bring it up, and then like your name obviously being associated heavily with all of that was definitely like I gotta really keep my eye on this guy now. Like it seems like he knows what's going on. And it's funny because I was doing my own research about the Sky People and what was going on, because I was kind of onto the same beats. I was like, okay, definitely, like there's something going on with the Wind Tribe, the people who made these robots in Skyward Sword, the Twilight, this whole, like, all these races are connected somehow. So, like, you know, or the Oka, the Twilight, these people who made these robots, and the Wind Tribe. So, like, I definitely felt like there was this like solid connection, and I just couldn't put my finger on it. And then, like, as I was looking up, I think, pictures about Minish Cap, I came across Yeah, I came across this one. Here, I'll share my screen.
Which one?
This one. And I was like, oh,
Ah,
who did
yeah.
this? And I obviously visit, on Google, visit site. And,
Mhm.
I came across this theory. And it's funny because
Yes.
like, it's in a way I felt kind of defeated because I was like, oh, someone already figured it out. I mean, not that like, not that, whatever. But it was so interesting too because I was just like, but like, wow, I was so blown out of the water by this theory that I just literally restated it word for word. But I'm interested. How did you put this together? And then this eloquent explanation after.
Lots and lots of graphic design, like attention to detail, and lots of time spent obsessing over textures and colors and repeated symbols. And I'm looking around, going through multiple playthroughs of Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword, the Wind Waker, and I'm like, oh, this looks familiar. Oh, this looks familiar. Oh, hey, I've seen this before. Hey, isn't that in this other game? Like, straight up. And yes, actually, there are a lot of shared textures, particularly between Skyward Sword, the Wind Waker, and Twilight Princess. And they seem to be used in very specific ways. And I'm like, okay, so I start looking into it, and it's like, okay, what else is familiar about these things? Like, what might be connecting them? And almost all of these objects are associated with an ancient civilization, typically one from the sky, or associated with like wind and sky magic, and they're all like highly sophisticated, highly advanced. And I'm like, okay, this means something. Like there's a reason that they keep going back to these same themes, the same exact symbols, reusing the same assets, the same textures.
What would you say the first, like, your first, like, aha moment was? Like, what was that, like, oh, like that first, like, itch to kind of start really investigating, like, really tearing apart textures and doing multiple playthroughs? Like, what was that first?
The very first one that really, like, kickstarted it for me is on, if you're looking at that particular page, the one comparing the Tower of the Gods exterior and the interior of the Palace of Twilight.
Yeah, that is a remarkable.
I was playing Twilight Princess HD and Wind Waker HD kind of back to back, just for the heck of it. And I'm like, wait, hold up. These look the same. And then I took a bunch of screenshots. I had taken some video recording as well of some of the locations. And I did a side-by-side comparison. I'm like, they don't just look the same. They are the same. Like, they are straight up the exact same textures. And that just opened up a whole can of worms, because I'm like, okay, so what else can I find that's
like
related?
This means something, right? Like, I'm not just
absolutely
crazy, right? Like, because like, I feel like as gamers, we can sometimes be like, oh, I'm just getting way too into this. It doesn't mean anything. Like, they're just reusing old assets, kind of like, there's like that mentality. And then there's like us who's like, oh, the language means something, boys. Like, yeah. Yeah, the Tower of the Gods is a really interesting, like, that looks like cuneiform or some kind of like it was very mysterious. Like I remember playing it when I was 15, like especially Wind Waker. I never noticed the the similarities between those two, the Twilight Princess and Wind Waker, but like it definitely carried the same feelings, and it gave the same like vibes that we all love. And
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, when I started really looking into this, I had some friends on my server who, had, let's say, mod we use. So they were able to look into and extract the textures so that we can do like an actual comparison. And what blew my mind is it wasn't just the same texture. They actually redrew the textures in the art style specific to each video game. So like the Wind Waker style was in that style.
Well,
Like
that makes sense because they're different
lines,
game
the lines are
systems.
thicker. It's slightly more cartoonish in appearance, whereas the one in Twilight Princess had slightly
straighter
like deeper
lines.
cuts.
Yeah.
And it like visually
Cleaner.
they are visually there's a slight discrepancy, but it matches the game that it was in, so that it wasn't just like a reapplication of a texture. They actually remade the texture and put it into the game. So like that was the key that I was like, okay, this definitely means something. Because if it was just a reuse, they would have just reused the texture, not redrawn it in the art style of that other game, right?
Well, essentially had to remake the asset, because if you think about it,
exactly,
it was GameCube, and then what? It came out on Wind Waker came out on GameCube.
They both came out on the GameCube originally, and they were both remade in HD on the Wii U. So
that is strange that they chose to because now I'm thinking about it, like I was thinking they're like different game systems at first, but then I'm like, you just said that, I'm like, no, they're the same. So like they literally took out, like some artists took out extra time to redraw this asset. Like they were paid to do like a work day to do that,
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, like that clearly, like that's showing intent. Like we want these two things to connect. Like we're willing to put work into it. It's not just slapping and pasting the same exact texture, which is interesting. I would have never noticed that.
That's what started me down that rabbit hole, and then I started noticing more and more, and like this ancient civilization seemed to make a lot of robots, and they used, ancient energy to create automatons. They had floating platforms. They were highly sophisticated. They used the same like spirals and swirls, very Mesoamerican and like Aztec aesthetic. A little bit of Incan, a little bit of Southeast Asian, a little bit of ancient Chinese. It's like a very specific mix. And they just kept reusing these in multiple games. I started seeing it not only in Twilight Princess and the Wind Waker, but Skyward Sword and the Minish Cap. Even though it's pixel art, there was still a lot of similar, like, check
absolutely
marks, especially with Mazal. Like Mazal, Godon, the ancient robots, like, it's right there. You could see it. Like, there's such a visual comparison, a visual connection between the two.
Oh yeah,
it's unreal.
I was blown away. Another thing I was super blown away by was before the game came out, when the spoilers, were circulating. You pinpointed this pattern on the back of the constructs and the fused shadow. Talk to me about that one.
Oh yeah. So I was one of those people who were looking through the art book leaks when they were briefly posted online. And like you had mentioned, they had some artwork of the constructs, known in Japanese as golems. And they had full body art, front, side profile, and back. And I noticed the back profile had very specific, let's say, textures, additions on it that resembled a set of eyes with intricate sort of extensions that resembled swirls and spirals. And it was a specific sequence of these things that I had seen before. So I start looking around, and sure enough, it was the back of the Fused Shadows. And of course, we know the Fused Shadows was a creation of the Interlopers, an ancient race who wielded sophisticated magic, tried to conquer ancient Hyrule and the Sacred Realm, tried to take command of the Triforce, and they disappeared. So we have these constructs who are an ancient piece of technology, but are clearly not just machines. They have this glowing energy running through them, so they're almost magical in nature. They have the same sort of patterns as the Fused Shadow, and I had seen other symbols and other patterns on them that indicated to me that they were from the ZONAI tribe, at least as far as we could tell from Breath of the Wild. And so it all started,
clicking
it
together.
just made sense. Yeah, it started clicking together. I was like, okay, so the ZONAI are this race who disappeared. We thought they were barbarians, but they clearly weren't. They had created this sophisticated magical technology, at least based on the symbolism on them. I could tell that they were from that race. And it seemed to have that same sort of appearance as the Fused Shadows, which again, ancient race, magic wielding. It just seemed too much to be a coincidence.
I can't find your original image that you made, but the eyeballs side by side,
the spirals down the center, and even the inspirations behind the Fused Shadows and a lot of the things we see in the Twilight Realm in Twilight Princess.
Double serpents, like those
double
kinds
serpents,
of motifs,
spirals,
eyeballs,
all these eye symbols, all the same things we see with the ZONAI technology, especially now with Tears of the Kingdom.
The swirls. I mean, like, what interests me is like the souls. I don't really know what to make of those still. The light of their world, and then like I have been having trouble deciding what I think of, like, how they're trying to portray, because it seems like they portray light with like yellow, but since Tears of the Kingdom, it seems like they're trying to portray light with like somewhat of the seafoam color too. Like, because like Zelda's, for instance, like Zelda's horns have they're like glowing blue. They actually almost glow bright
like
in
a
the night.
Pale blue, teal green.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, and it just like wraps up all together. So like since the game has come out, like how have your perceptions of the Sky People changed? And then like how have you like shifted your discovery? Like what's the next thing you're kind of investigating?
Well, that's a great question. So I feel a little vindicated knowing that the ZONAI were a sky civilization and that they were an advanced ancient civilization, that they did create the constructs. All of that felt really good to know for certain that I was right and I was on the right trail.
Yeah, you were right, man. You deserve to wear that badge, like,
Thank
because
you.
it's cool. Like, I mean, you made this theory up essentially, like, you know, like 6 years ago, and you know, it's to have all the vindication in the world. Like, everything comes out and it's just like, Lorulean, you were right. And it's just like, yeah. I mean, it's seriously spot on. Like,
Yeah.
all this.
So the only thing that's still a little up in the air is when or how the ZONAI relate to the interlopers. But I still have a theory on that as well. We know from Tears of the Kingdom, from a couple of characters, in particular our big bad, that there was a time before Rauru and Sonia founded their kingdom of Hyrule that it was an era of chaos and that people were a little more ferocious, a little more violent. It could have been during that time period that, you know, fighting over control of that territory was taking place. And if some of the ZONAI, you know, weren't quite as benevolent as Rauru and his sister Minoru, they could have, you know, ended up barking up some divine trees, so to speak, and been punished for, you know, stepping in and dominating some of the other species, some of the other races, and they could have been that origin point, and hence all of those similarities would still hold and make sense, because there's absolutely still something going on there. The Twilight, the interlopers, have so many of the hallmarks of this ancient race that to not have a connection, in my opinion, it just doesn't make sense. We just haven't seen that moment. That's what I think.
But first, a word from our sponsors.
Hey there, brave adventurers of Hyrule! Are you ready to embark on epic quests, solve mind-bending puzzles, and uncover the secrets of the Triforce? If you are, then you've come to the right place. Welcome to our Zelda YouTube channel, where the magic of the beloved franchise comes right to life. If you're as passionate about all things Zelda as we are, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. By subscribing, you'll be the first to know about our latest videos, in-depth analyses, and exciting gameplay showcases. Join our ever-growing community of fellow fans, and let's share the adventure together. We have some thrilling news to share. We've just launched our Patreon page, and we couldn't be more excited. By becoming a patron, you have the power to directly support our channel and its content. Your generosity will help keep this channel sponsorship-free, allowing us to focus solely on delivering the best Zelda content imaginable. To all the amazing fans who decide to join our Patreon family, we want to extend a heartfelt thank you in advance. Your support means the world to us, and it enables us to continue creating the Zelda videos you love. From the bottom of our hearts, we appreciate your dedication and enthusiasm. Thank you. Thank you, brave adventurers!
All right, back to it. I agree. I don't think we've seen... I think they're dancing around it. Like, they're trying to give us evidence, but they're very careful about the release of this particular piece of information. They don't... I don't think they even allude to it in any way. It's just like, if anything, the evidence that we do have is kind of muddled, because you have, like, on one hand, like, Ganondorf saying perished, and then, you know, there's Majora's Mask saying that, like, the ancient race and that perished, but then there's, you know, in this realm, or like in you know, ancient context, it's like, oh, these people were banished to the Twilight Realm. So it's like, you know, there's like almost these the information we have is misleading, you know,
a little misleading potentially. It also could be a misunderstanding. Because even in Twilight Princess, if, during the beginning of the game when Link is sort of sitting and reflecting with Russell talks about how the spirits of the dead intersect with their world during the hour of twilight. There were some other characters, I can't recall all of them, and where specifically. I know some of them were in Hyrule Castletown. They talk about how there were wars over the land, and that the people who lost their lives during that fight seem to be the source of the malice and the curse that's afflicting the land. So they consider the Twilight Realm to be literally the realm of the dead. And even Midna reflects on that, mentioning to Link how the people of the Light World consider the realm of shadows to be an afterlife. But then she goes on to say that that's not really the case, and that they weren't, killed and sent to this place, but they were banished. But to the perspective of the survivors and the people who weren't banished, a whole group of people just suddenly up and disappeared. I mean, it's not unreasonable to assume that they were all killed. So
Yeah, I agree with that. It's funny, something you said about the Russell, it got my brain jogging, because I feel like I was trying to communicate that to you a couple weeks ago with I feel like Hyrule, all of Hyrule turns, like the water sources turn kind of this weird bluish, like right at twilight, not dawn, but only twilight. And I wonder if there's any truth to that. Like, are we going to see that maybe? Because to me, it looks like we're setting up for part 3. This definitely felt like a big act 2, like, kind of like now we understand. I feel like I understand the cycle. I mean, not everybody shares my headcanon, but I feel like we have a better understanding, at least, of what the cycle is and like what it entails. And so I wonder if they're going to kind of venture into that later on. Sorry, I'm getting off topic. Let me ask the next question. What do the ZONAI, the Kokiri, the Twilight, and the Oka Sky people in general, and the Wind Tribe, like, all have in common to you?
Well, in my findings, in my research, the ZONAI, the Twilight, the Uka, also known as the Sky People or the Sky Beings, if you're looking into the Japanese lore, and the People of the Wind or the Wind Tribe are all associated with ancient magic, with the sky, with the wind, the element of wind in particular. They either create things like the gust bellows or, magical fans. They can all fly or levitate, or they have the technology to do so in some capacity. And they have a lot of that shared symbolism with the spirals and swirls, which tend to represent the breath of life, the breath of wind. The Kokiri have a little bit of that. They have a lot of sort of shared assets. Yeah. I mean, to some extent.
They do.
As
they
the
fly
the
up.
Koroks, they can.
Yeah. Oh, not the Kokiri. Yeah, sorry. I was thinking Koroks, Kokiri. I don't know why in my head, like, my brain just like counts those as like the same two. And it's like, I know they're not.
I mean, they are the same race. They're just slightly different forms.
I have to like actively separate them in my head. I have to like think about it, because I'm like, they are separate, but it's just like they give me the same vibe for sure.
But in terms of the Kokiri, like the rest all make sense, as we've discussed. With the ZONAI, the Uka, the Wind Tribe, the Twilight, But with the Kokiri, I mean, prior to the Wind Waker, or at least in like the past of the Wind Waker, we have the ancient sage Fado, who was a sage of wind. So there's an association with wind there right off the cuff. When we look into development notes, commentary, the wind element was originally the original intent for the forest.
The forest temple,
medallion.
Yeah.
The forest temple, the forest medallion, the symbol that we see on it is associated with wind. It's actually a little whirlwind shape.
You get the sacred peats from that dungeon, and then you can yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, the whole dungeon's, I mean, there's fans in the dungeon. You have to walk across air. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm surprised they changed it so late in development to forest from wind, because even though they changed it, it still definitely conveys that wind element very clearly.
Yeah, at least to some extent it does. Particularly in Ganon's tower, his version of the forest temple for the seal that you can undo is almost entirely wind based. So they still held on to that original inspiration, that original intent. I believe, looking back at the commentary, there was a disconnect with what they intended and what they could actually achieve with the technology at the time. They really wanted to convey like a sense of wind. So they ended up eventually coming to that with the Wind Waker on the GameCube, which is why we have such a strong element of the wind. You know, you're sailing, you're controlling the wind. They didn't really have that. They couldn't really achieve that on the N64. So they really parsed it down from what they had originally had in mind. But like you said, there was still that little bit of that connection there. There was still that hint of it.
I mean, they were working
it just
with
wasn't
like
fully realized.
Only so many like, because you have to understand, like the 64 only had one cartridge, and so they had to pick and choose like what got included, like because there was so much cut content, like because like that's why the Majora's Mask is like the expansion pack is literally required, and even then they were picking and choosing like what dialogue and what stuff to add and subtract. So
yeah,
then, you know, obviously with the GameCube coming out and then CD-ROMs, being able to have like these tiny CDs, which held so much more space, like we were able to see like a more fleshed out, like you were saying, like a more fully realized kind of idea of that, like that element that they were trying to convey.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll mention in terms of commonality between the Kokiri and the rest of those groups, particularly with the ZONAI, but to some extent also with the Wind Tribe and the Uka, they had a presence in Faron Woods. I mean, in Breath of the Wild, the titular ZONAI ruins were in Faron Woods. The Kokiri have always been associated with the forest and with Faron Woods. We see that in Twilight Princess. Even though the Kokiri themselves don't make an actual appearance, the forest temple, rife with their symbolism. It has the crest of the Kokiri on every door. There's a theory that the forest temple in that game is just an overgrown 𝙀𝙤𝙞𝙨 tree, or that it is the Kokiri forest, fully fleshed out. In the same vein as the Forbidden Woods in the Wind Waker are the original Kokiri forest. It was the original home of the Koroks while they were still around, before it was infested with monsters and they relocated to the 𝙀𝙤𝙀𝙨 tree.
Yeah. I was gonna say, do
So
you think the forest like moves around with them? Because like obviously,
potentially,
yeah, I think the magic kind of flows with the Koroks, like wherever they go, like they're inherently magical, and
yeah.
you know, obviously there's what is the oldest tree stump in Hyrule, I guess, and we see that in Hyrule Field, and then obviously, like you were
Mhm.
mentioning, Farron Woods, that's been
Mhm.
prominent location, and then now we have them on the north of the map, so.
Yeah.
That was my kind of idea with the Koroks, is that they have to like just carry the magic with them, you know.
And I mean, we saw them in the Wind Waker spreading forests, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
They were planting seeds across the Great Sea, with the intent of expanding the foothold of the forest. The Great Deku Tree's wish, of course, being that over time, those forests that they foster and that they help grow would help connect the islands, whether that would be slightly draining the water or sort of like a mangrove, the
Oh,
roots and
interesting.
um, the roots and the trunks, add to the land. Um, until eventually all of the islands would be connected as one. That was his end goal, his dream. But we have no idea how successful he was.
I mean, I feel like
Since
we can
the
kind of
story,
I
to some extent, I mean, most of it's still left up in the air
I don't know, cuz
because.
yeah, well the canon elements that are now in this game, regardless of how we got here, right?
Mhm.
We still have canon, like as much as people like to argue over the timeline, we still end up at the same place. Essentially, everything's canon. So,
Yeah.
I would say like yeah, I think the Deku Tree was successful, and I really like that idea of the him being like trying to help kind of connect the lands and like soak up this water, he's like this huge element to it, but not really talked
Yeah.
about. So interesting. Because like I never thought about that, like the intent of like planting all these seeds, like it's like you think about it but not, I mean, as a kid, not too deeply
Yeah.
sometimes. On that kind of same vein, how does Tears of the Kingdom still connect to, kind of like switching gears a little bit, to Twilight Princess? Like, how do you think that those two still connect?
Um, it's still in a lot of the same ways that I found connections between Twilight Princess and Breath of the Wild. But the story itself focuses more on obviously the origins of the kingdom, which Twilight Princess does to some extent. There's the lore about the Uka, or the Sky People, who founded the kingdom, who built the Temple of Time, who were closer to the gods than even the Hylians. All of that was first touched upon with Twilight Princess, and in my opinion, we actually see some of those events taking place. We see a sky being, Rauru,
A ZONAI
founding the
built
kingdom.
ZONAI built Temple of Time in the sky. What? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, so they did build the temple.
Yeah, they did. It gets a little complicated, of course, because obviously, if they lifted their Temple of Time into the sky, but there's still a Temple of Time on the surface, then it was rebuilt,
It had
at
to
some
be.
point thereafter.
It
Whether
had
or
to
not
be.
that was by the Hylians, or whether or not that was
Well, like obviously,
by
right?
some other
Like
people.
it had
Yeah,
to have been built by the Hylians. It
had to have
matches all
been.
the other Hylian architecture that
It does.
I feel like that's the obvious conclusion to come to, is that the Hylians built this new Temple of Time in homage to the one that was lifted to the sky. I feel like that is the conclusion,
Yeah,
the Nintendo approved conclusion to come to.
and that's fair. And then I guess in terms of sort of reconciling that with the information we had in Twilight Princess, if there was an original Temple of Time that was built by the Sky Beings, by the ZONAI, and that particular temple was lifted up, but another one was built in its place with the same name, some of the stories and some of the elements of one might have been conflated with the other. So they still passed down those stories and they still had that information, but the actual temple that they would be referring to was moved. It's up in the air. I mean, that's just something like, as a headcanon, that's how I could see that sort of panning out, since it is technically a retcon, because they decided to move the temple into the sky
Well, like,
instead of keeping it on the ground.
I don't think it is, because I think that, like, I don't think it's a complete retcon, because
no, but it's sort of a soft one. It changes it up a little bit because the intention with Twilight Princess itself, with the Temple of Time that we see there, was that it was the structure built by the Sky Beings. Even Uku mentions that the technology of her clan was present. It was there in the temple. And I mean,
well, maybe because it was the entrance to the sacred realm, you know, like, because we go through the doors to the past, and then we're in essentially a different space, right? Like,
yes, that's true.
So, like, that's what I thought they were more referring to, not the external, this like external place. I thought they were always referring to the internal, like the light realm is what they built. That's the way I understood it to be. Like, maybe the actual teleportation, but because I always thought to me it always appeared like the Hylians built the Temple of Time in the physical world, but the way I interpreted it was that when they were referring to it, the Sky People building the Temple of Time, they were kind of out of context, like they were referring to the technology, because like all the technology's on the inside, right? Like all the cool stuff, like that, the smooth marble and like the gold reliefs, those are all on the inside of the past. So
that's fair. That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I thought about this, like, obviously a lot, but because like I don't know. I think that the light realm and the temple in the sky were like ZONAI built, and then like obviously the Highlands having kind of worshipped these people, like they because I mean they're just better, you know, like in every way, because like I mean Highlands are still living in the Stone Age, so it's like you have these people who are like way better than you, so kind of like protecting these locations that they built entrances to, and like doing what they can on their side of it with their stone tools and only their bricks, you know, which is wild. Like, why haven't Highlands advanced at all? It's so strange.
I don't know. I mean, we know that the Hylians, specifically with the aid of the Sheikah, who we know from Tears of the Kingdom, are just a subset of Hylians. 10,000 years ago, they had advanced their civilization, at least to some extent, but between then and the present, and between the time of Rauru and Sonia and that ancient calamity, however many tens of thousands of years that was, yeah, Hyrule didn't seem to advance very much.
No, I don't.
It's always been medieval or, you know, Renaissance period with some slight industrial revolution thrown in to the mix,
I guess, you know.
But everyone, it seems to reason that they get slightly more advanced during eras of prosperity, but completely get set back to the medieval period fully during eras of decline, and they have a lot of decline.
that is true. You brought up Rauru and Sonia. I was interested in asking you about the marks on their arms, and like, are those clan markings? Like, what do you think of that?
They could be.
Like,
I
have you
know
given
in
any
this
thought?
a little bit. So at least in terms of Sonia, we see a lot of tattoos on her person, not just on her arms, but on her legs, on her face. We see all these white markings. Among those markings are the wing crest, like the Hyrulean royal family or the Hylian wing crest. We have the Triforce. We have like the ZONAI eyes. Some spirals and swirls. Lots of lines though. It's very stylized. But it's a specific style, and it seems to be Hylian-esque ZONAI markings, because we see the same ZONAI body art to some extent with the ancient heroes aspect, and a little bit, not so much with tattoos, but in particular with like body modifications with Rauru and Minoru. Rauru and Minoru both have they almost look like gems, studded into their face, particularly around their eyes. And Sonia has the same sort of markings, but they're made as, like I said, like a tattoo. Instead of being jewels or pieces of gold, they are ink tattooed into her skin or painted onto her skin. So they seem to be related in that regard. But yeah, it like I said, those ones specifically seem to be Hylian oriented,
So cool.
sky
It's
people
so
oriented.
rad.
Yeah, it's very cool.
It's like such a rad tattoo. I really love it. I can't find a picture of it, but yeah, it's just really cool. I have like so many files, dude. I like to find one thing is to dig.
Same.
I know you
same.
know.
I know that struggle.
It's real, man. So yeah, it's like you're like, I know it's like an obvious one. It should be easy, but it's not.
Yeah.
What was my next question? How many different ancient civilizations of our own do you see within this, like the sky people? Like what have you found in your research, like especially as of late with all the new information?
So, in terms of the ancient civilization and its real world inspirations, I mentioned previously there's some Mesoamerican, so a little bit of Maya, ancient Mexica or Aztec, a little of Teotihuacan. There's also some Incan, particularly when we're comparing, like I said, Godon and Mazal and the similar sort of constructs of that nature. They actually look like the Incan sun god, like straight up. They just look like Incan sun gods. I believe his name is Inti or Inti. Yes, I'm pretty sure his name is Inti. Very, very cool. But in addition to that, there's also a little of old world inspirations with them. When it comes to the old world, a lot of it comes from Southeast Asia, but also ancient China. When it comes to ancient China, it's specifically the Shang or Shang dynasty, which use a lot of bronze. They're one of the earliest Bronze Age civilizations in East Asia.
Which makes sense because the Jomon period was right before that, which obviously we saw more reflected in Breath of the Wild, right?
Yeah. With the ancient Sheikah in particular.
And then the Yayoi period being right after this Bronze Age, where basically people of 𝙀𝙤, a tribe, what's thought of as a tribe, I should say. I'll correct that. They believe that a tribe from 𝙀𝙤 came across the seas or walked across and brought with them the bronze mirrors from like China, and that's how they were kind of first introduced. And then they go through this amazing Bronze Age that lasts like so long. And in this period, they get the ability to make agriculture, like do rice, like because before that they were having trouble with like agriculture, I think some water problems, and then like because there was no irrigation and all these other issues, and then they bring all their knowledge and experience over, and then the Bronze Age kicks off and Japan flourishes. It's crazy. And in this period I definitely see like a lot of what you're saying, like this like inspiration. I mean, even the constructs, like the bells, that the bronze bells that they brought over look like the constructs themselves.
They do. And so that is obviously a heavy inspiration. But like I said, there's also some other Southeast and East Asian inspirations as well. In particular, there's a lot of Hindu Buddhist symbolism. Of course, Buddhism and even Hinduism originate in India, so that would be South Asia, which spread into China and Southeast Asia shortly thereafter, so roughly 2,500 years ago. And so that inspired a lot of the architecture and artwork of these ancient civilizations, one of which is known as the Khmer, which existed in what is now modern-day Cambodia.
Oh, I was just looking into this last night. Hold on. What is it? How do you spell that? Khmer?
𝙀𝙤𝙞𝙨.
HMER. I heard something in a documentary. I watch documentaries constantly at night. That's like my guilty pleasure, is watching documentaries about ancient civilizations at night.
Nice.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
So the Khmer civilization, they look in terms of their aesthetic.
Wow.
Look like Mesoamerican, like Aztec temples. They have a lot of these sort of tall pyramid mound temples. They have a lot of the same sort of symbolism. Obviously, their particulars of their culture differ greatly, but a lot of the aesthetics are quite similar.
Yeah.
But in addition to that, and what's really curious, is the Khmer civilization have an origin myth that involves Naga, or serpent people, essentially founding their royal family. And the Naga, in terms of how they're sort of described, are very Chinese dragon-esque. They are these powerful semi-divine beings. They're associated with water, but also with the sky, and they essentially married a human, and their children
no way
founded the Khmer Empire.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So, that's something I'm gonna have to chew on. Looks up Khmer Khmer.
Yeah.
Documentaries quickly. No, this is awesome. What a find. And then
right?
what I sent you last night too. The four-eyed. Yeah, I'm really excited about that.
So, of course, ancient Chinese spread throughout East Asia and Southeast Asia until it eventually reached Japan. So there's a lot of that inspiration, that content there as well.
Well, because like the Japanese are very good at being presented new cultures and like adapting them to fit their own, from what I understand. And then like you have like the Japanese, I forget which point, it's definitely later on that they stopped trading with the rest of the world. But during that trading period, especially when China was going through, I think it's something with the three of their leading dynasties were fighting with each other, and then all the trade came closed off from there, which didn't allow the trade of all their bronze and magic mirrors stopped coming over. So they had to find a new source. And, this opened them up to receiving stuff from 𝙀𝙀, and 𝙀𝙀, Korea in general, was doing trade all throughout, like with people from Thailand. And then, obviously there's merchants that travel from like ancient Mesopotamia area. And so you have like a lot of these Eastern influences mixing with each other, like a lot of these shared practices, like, oh, you have a god of death? Me too. Oh, in our culture, we believe this about that person. And then they're like, oh, snap, that's pretty cool. So it's like, one guy kind of hears something about an ancient myth and combines it with their own. And so that's how we see all these different deviations of deities. Which is so cool. Like, because like each tribe can essentially have their own view of each deity, which is
for sure.
Japan is so much more segmented than because like I feel like a lot of us think of it as a whole, but for most of history, they were actually like broken down into a lot of these smaller tribes, kind of like Hyrule is, if you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the world was like that for a long period of time. So
self-governing tribes. What was my next question? Let's see here. So I think I found this on your Twitter or something. I wanted you to explain this. It's very interesting to me. I have no idea what it is.
So this particular image is made up. It's a collage of various Shang dynasty bronzes.
Wow.
So we're going back to ancient China, and I mean, I see a lot of resemblance between these particular figures and the fused shadows, but
Skyward
also
Sword,
with a lot of the ZONAI relics that we saw in Tears of the Kingdom and in Breath of the Wild. At least at that time, Breath of the Wild for sure. Some of those owl and bird statuettes, in particular, the wing style, with that sort of spiral crest and then the feathers pointing downward.
It looks like the dragon heads.
We see that exactly like recreated with the owl statues in Breath of the Wild.
That's true.
And then of course, when it comes to some of those images on the upper right-hand side, those are known as 𝙀𝙀. 𝙀𝙀 are sort of like, the best way to describe it is it's a kind of oni or monster that is created with large eyes, typically has fangs, horns. It's very wild, very ferocious in appearance. And they tended to create this 𝙀𝙀 on a lot of their artwork.
Aren't these like on the backs of like all the constructs and like,
so that's the thing.
armor?
So we see that similar sort of idea manifested not only in the fused shadows, but also in Xant's helmet. We see it on the constructs. We see it on the Zonite armor. On the back of the head, they actually have this sort of 𝙀𝙀-esque face that's recreated there. It's a very Shang, or like I said, Shang dynasty. The pronunciation could be either or. I've heard both.
Yeah, I've been unclear on the pronunciation of that as well. Yeah, because it's like I've literally heard it both ways in so many sources.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I have no
Yeah,
clue.
so many sources. So it's really hard to pinpoint. So I catch myself, and it's like, is it this or is it this one? I don't know. I'm gonna say both.
No, yeah, that's super. Because like this duality, this two-face thing, this theme, like, because like if these are on the backs usually, right? Of like the fused shadow.
They can be on the backs. In terms of the real world bronzes and pottery here, they can be on the back. They can be on the sides. They could be literally anywhere on the bronzeware.
Okay.
Yeah, but
why do they do
be...
this? Like, what's the point of inscribing this face onto your beautiful? So you make a beautiful bird pot. Why put this on your beautiful bird pot with it?
That's the question. I mean, there's a few competing narratives, a few competing theories that I've heard. The more popular one, and the one that I can see
your headcanon
as a headcanon. It's similar to medieval use of gargoyles, or recreating, like, say, an Oni mask or something of that nature. Evil, like evil spirits, monsters, that sort of thing, tend to, or are believed to, shy away from a reflection of themselves. So if you have this sort of ferocious looking creature depicted on your temple wall or on your sacred object, the idea behind it would be that it is warding them away.
I see.
So that's the main theory that I've heard.
Well, that makes sense.
There are a few different ideas.
Because, like,
in terms of,
go ahead, sir. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Just in terms of, like, where they originated from or why they create them, no one truly knows, at least from my research. But like I said, there are a few different competing narratives, and that was the most popular one. So that's the one that I subscribe to. But
I'm with it, because, like, also we kind of see this practice picked up by Okinawans. The one of the major things that I saw, because, like, I went to Japan, but I didn't go to mainland Japan whenever I lived in Guam.
Nice.
Yeah, it was beautiful. And in Okinawa, it's like a way more traditional version of Japan. And they have these dog figurines everywhere. An open mouth and a closed mouth. Sometimes they're lions, sometimes they're dogs, sometimes they're just two animals, but one open mouth and one closed mouth. And the open mouth one looks like mean, and like it's like yelling, and kind of like it reminds me of like the eyeballs on these guys, like they're bulging kind of, and that's meant to keep the bad spirits out. And then the one with the mouth closed is supposed to keep the good spirits in. I think they're called shisa.
Okay.
Yeah. So, like,
nice.
I feel like I can see that like, you know, this duality of like having like something like beautiful paired with something that looks kind of demonic makes sense for like good like keep good. I mean, like, this is a container, right? Like, keep good spirits in, ward bad
keep
spirits
the bad
away.
ones out. Yeah.
Especially if you're talking about something like water, you would want that to stay pure.
Water,
food,
different ferments, different alcohols, that sort of thing. These bronzewares were used for a lot of different functions, and a lot of them involve food and drink, so that makes sense. I mean, germ theory didn't exist for a long time.
You can look at a bacteria though and be like, that looks gross, I don't want to eat that. So, like, I bet, you know, they felt like they had some control over the preservation of their food by you know, and because I bet if you saw mold like in the ancient past and everything, you think everything's kind of like a kami. I mean, I would think that mold is a kami at that point. Like, oh, obviously I did something bad with this food, you know. I didn't appease the spirits the right way. So, maybe by making a more elaborate container, for instance, to preserve our food. Because, I mean, food, that's a sparse, especially ancient times, that was like containing it and preserving it was a difficult thing.
Yep.
Everybody struggled with that.
Yep. But it was important for your survival, so...
yeah, that's so cool, though. I love this. I'm glad that I asked you about this, because I'll have to do my own research on it. I just saw a brief explanation. I was like, oh, that's so interesting. I need to talk more about that. Let's see here. Oh, this is a random one. I had to scroll way back for it. What is 𝙀𝙤𝙀𝙀? Can you explain the significance?
So 𝙀𝙀𝙀 is it's Gerudo. So when it comes to the Gerudo, and that term in particular, before the tribe was created in the series, we had Gerudo-Amu, or Geldarm, and we had Gerudo-Man, which is Geldman, both associated with deserts, both enemy class monsters that appeared in a lot of the classical games. So that term, Gerudo, seems to mean something. And they used it again when it came to naming this desert-dwelling race. But when they originally started writing and creating the sort of language of these people, in particular, you can actually see it in the Hyrule Historia. There's actually a breakdown of the Gerudo typography, the Gerudo script. It doesn't say Gerudo language, it says 𝙀𝙀𝙀 script. So 𝙀𝙀𝙀 was the original intention, the original meaning of the word Gerudo. This has changed since then. In Breath of the Wild, we see Gerudo script that actually reads Gerudo instead of 𝙀𝙀𝙀. So they seem to have sort of accepted
took the L,
this
moved on.
particular they accepted this particular localization as de facto, but the original intention seems to have been 𝙀𝙀𝙀. So 𝙀𝙀𝙀, Geldman, Geldarm, all associated with the desert. But now that they've accepted Gerudo as a term, maybe Geldarms and Geldman might be Gerudo arms and Gerudo men in the future. We don't know. But
I could see it. I feel like they're building up a case for that for sure, because of these red-haired kind of lizard-esque, but with dog feature peoples. Because let's be honest here, the ancient aspect armor, that to me that doesn't look like the ZONAI that we were presented, what were believed to be traditional ZONAI, and to me they look nothing the same as the ancient aspect. I feel like they're entirely different.
I can see that point for sure. Obviously the general I guess makeup construct of the ancient heroes aspect has ZONAI influence, right? So the vast majority of the armor that the ancient hero appears to have been wearing is straight up taken from the Zonite armor. So it has like the Zonite leggings and the Zonite chest piece. The only thing that it's lacking is the helm. But in terms of the actual sort of physical build of the ancient hero, yes, it definitely differs from Rauru and Minaru. However, I can see the potential of there being some ZONAI influence there, in the same token or the same vein as the Rito are predominantly based on birds of prey, but we also have a pelican, an owl, and a macaw. And when it comes to the Zora, they're primarily based on marine life. Particularly, we see sharks and dolphins, but there are also manta rays and whales that have influenced particular character designs. So we're not necessarily limited to a single inspiration for a tribe or for a race. It seems to be more generalized. So in terms of the ZONAI, from what we've seen of Rauru and Minaru, they are mammalian, sort of goat or dog-like, but obviously their feet are slightly more human-like. They have really long ears, almost rabbit-like ears, and yeah, definitely a goat face, but some slightly dog-like features. What I see with the ancient hero is very dog-like features, but a lack of a lot of those other traits. So there's not a whole lot of goat-like traits. And this figure is very dog-like in comparison, but still very mammalian and not human. They're more humanoid, and they're not a reptile, they're not a bird, and they're not a fish. So the only group from what we've been introduced to so far that they'd have at least some overlap with is the ZONAI. So that's why I think there's definitely a connection still there.
Maybe it has
But
something to do with
from
from
a different family,
yeah,
or a different,
or something to do with light, because if they're also in fact connected to the Twilight people, like they were like deprived of light, so maybe there's a connection there. Who knows?
Maybe.
Yeah,
We don't know.
Yeah,
But
we have no idea. Last question, can you give me the breakdown of what is going on with the ZONAI language? Like, where are we at with that? Just so the audience knows, like, how difficult, because like I feel like a lot of people are just like, it's made up, it's gibberish. It's like, it's not, but it's I kind of want to just briefly kind of flesh out why this misconception exists, and could you elaborate on that?
Sure. So the ZONAI script or ZONAI language, which we've seen pretty much since the second or third teaser trailer, and that we see predominantly throughout Tears of the Kingdom, appears to be based on ancient Chinese or ancient Japanese. There are only 14 characters, 14 distinct characters that we've seen sort of reused to create different phrases. And they're plastered on pretty much everything that the ZONAI made. Trying to decipher them and make sense of them has been a very difficult task. A few friends of mine, like Zoe Saurus Rex, she was very, very active on Reddit and Discord. She's been taking sort of a backseat as of now, but she was very prominent and very active, and and was one of the first people I had seen that was trying to crack this code. And she treated it like a cipher, and that's my understanding of it.
That's my understanding too.
Yeah, using these 14 characters as a base and looking at other scripts and other fonts that the series has used, the various forms of Hylian, the Gerudo, the Ancient Sheikah.
Yeah, because Ancient Hylian is like made off of the I'm sorry, I don't know exactly what it's called, but it's a specific Japanese alphabet, no?
Depends on it depends on the
ancient
the version of Hylian
used
Ancient
in
Hylian.
Ocarina of Time on like the signs and such.
So in Ocarina of Time, and definitely in the Wind Waker, it's primarily based on katakana. It's a very stylized form of katakana, but if you actually sort of viewed them in comparison or like a side by side, you would see a lot of the resemblance. Most of the Hylian scripts up until recently, basically Twilight Princess, Skyward Sword, A Link Between Worlds, and by extension Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, those ones were the only ones that used English as a base for their Hylian script. All of the others where it's appeared, Ocarina of Time, the Wind Waker, the Minish Cap, basically all of the Toon games, all use this Japanese version of Hylian. It's really cool. I definitely recommend looking into the various Hylian scripts and kind of comparing them for yourself. But
and going off of this like
that,
cipher idea, because like
yeah,
I feel like if you look at it as a cipher, it makes more sense, because like I'm convinced that either there's like some kind of real world matching poem, real world matching alphabet, or that within the game there's some kind of key that will unlock the rest of the language, is the way I view it.
I feel the same. In terms of actually deciphering this language and trying to make sense of it, like I said, my friends and I, we got really far with it prior to release, in particular with the art book leaks, because there was a ton of instances of these characters, the script, throughout the book. So we cataloged all of these instances. We started running through algorithms to sort of compare, say, English letter usages, Japanese letter usages, like how common are particular sounds and particular phonemes. Like it got very technical. And Matt and Zoe were phenomenal when it came to that. I was great in seeing a lot of patterns, but when it came to like the technical mathematical coding side of this, Matt and Zoe, hands down, VIP. Fantastic. Cannot recommend their work in deciphering this and trying to decipher this language more.
Honestly, their work has been so, it's like led to so many like great, analyses of this.
Absolutely.
Because like I feel like that's the only way we're gonna crack this is together. Like people just understanding what's going on, the right person being subjected to it and being like, oh, that's a keyword cipher. It's this, it's like that would be great. Like
that would be fantastic.
I'm not smart enough to figure this stuff out. There is this cipher site that
there's a few there's definitely a few. I know they were using a particular program, and I can't recall it off the top of my head. But
I don't know about theirs.
They put so many hours in to try and solve this, and I can't stress this enough. We had a working cipher. Like, we, based on the art book leaks, based on the previous trailers, and a little bit of like the snippets of gameplay that they had sort of released prior to the final release of the game. Every instance of this ZONAI script that we could find, we had cataloged it. We had, brute force tried to crack this code. And the code, the cipher that we had sort of settled upon, was based on Japanese, in particular using the consonants. So there are 14 characters. With those 14 characters, we would have the 5 vowels and 9 consonants. So there are various combinations of consonant and vowel when it comes to Japanese, because it's a syllabic or syllabary language. So like you would have your A, E, I, O, and U, but then you would have ha, he, hu, he, and ho. So it's all H with a combination of a vowel. And then you would have all of your K's, your ka, ke, ku, ki, ko, all the way down. So there's a specific sequence, there's a specific set of consonants that they use. And when we were looking at the base kana, the base language without any modifiers, there were 9 consonants and 5 vowels. And we're like, okay, that's 14. We can work with this. We'll try and see what we can build off of that, what we can sort of read. And when we started using particular sequences of those consonants and those vowels, we started getting words. They were very simple, like simple Japanese words, but we started seeing ones that meant device or machine on ZONAI devices.
Yeah.
We started seeing there was this stone slab, this stone stela, that meant it had some artwork for it in the art book, in the leak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I remember that.
We tried to crack that because there was a lot of text on there, and we started getting a few different readings, all based, again, from Japanese, but it mentioned eras of prosperity, it mentioned First Kingdom, it mentioned Demon King, all of this stuff. We're like, okay, hang on. What's going on here? Like, did we solve this? We felt very confident with it. It all seemed to make sense. Like everything that we were reading was coming up as like
solid,
simplified ancient Japanese, and it was legible.
Right.
And then the final build of the game comes out, and they changed a bunch of the letters. Like, they changed specific sequences of letters of this script. And suddenly our cipher didn't work anymore. It didn't make any sense. So we went back to square one, and
I wonder if that cipher is useful in any way. Like, maybe it's a cipher of that cipher, if that makes sense. So, like,
I don't know.
By rearranging yeah, exactly. I don't know either. It's so confusing. Yeah,
it is.
The wheels in the Temple of Time, that was what I was looking into, was,
Mm-hmm.
we have these matching symbols. That's the only place I've seen them like lined up like that.
There's actually one other, there's several other locations that have it, but there's one other instance that we see the exact same sequence repeated like that, and it is all of the shrines, the warp pads.
Mm-hmm.
They're all the exact same sequence. So it's specifically like I said, there are 14 characters. So starting from character 1 to 14, and then duplicating the last, I think it's the last 4 or 5 of them, and then that brings you back full circle. So it's like 1, 2, 3, 4 through to 14, and then it's like 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and then back to square one. So like, is that the alphabet? Do they just repeat some letters? I don't know.
That might
Maybe
be the keyword, because like a lot of ciphers are like keyword ciphers, which is like you take your so like if you had the word shift as your keyword cipher, then you would take the last letter and TUVWXYZ ABC, like leaving out the letters of shift, if that makes sense. So you have ciphers like that too that exist. You
Possibly.
have that's ciphers where they just scramble the letters and they just put them right below, and then they just cipher it like that. So you have like double ciphers that can exist. So it'd be like translated into another language, and then a cipher of that that ZONAI language ciphered into more ZONAI language, but just scrambled. So
I mean that's definitely a possibility.
I'm not smart enough to figure this stuff out. It seems like people are doing statistical analysis of like frequency and such, and it's like,
yes,
I'm not there.
Frequency analysis is big. In addition to the ZONAI relics and ZONAI script on them, there's a couple of instances in game, in Tears of the Kingdom, where it seems that Toru, I guess, not really sure on his pronunciation, but the ZONAI survey team lead in Kakariko Village, he's the one that they say in game had cracked the code, and he was able to read the ZONAI script.
Like,
he was teaching.
Can we look at that, bro? Can we get a little look at that, man? It's like, God.
He appears to have used instances of the ZONAI script in some of his notes. Like, there's a drawing of the giant ring ruin, and it has ZONAI script in the corner. It's 2 lines of script, and the very last line, the line underneath, looks like it says ruin, like RUIN in English, but it's ZONAI script. So I'm like, okay. So I'm like, so is this giving us the RUIN? Is this a key? And then I plug it in, and it doesn't make sense anywhere else.
Yeah, so you have like sometimes this like unknown writing, like from Pokemon, the unknown ZONAI writing, which looks like perfect English, kind of like the Gerudo script or the Hylian script, where it's like it's kind of written in perfect English. Like, I mean, I was even able to translate like the Gerudo thing. I sent it to you. It's like Gerudo is a blossoming flower, desert flower. It's like, that was like 5 minutes of me like, just looking at the alphabet and translating. But it's not like that, unfortunately. It's like such a bummer, because like I think they know how much people like obsess about this stuff, and they want. It's like they gave us all the clues to crack in this language. But
but they made it really difficult to do so.
It's really hard.
It really gives me like, it kind of gets me right in the gut, because
I want to know if the language means something, man.
Right. The language want to know what the Temple of Time says.
Like what are those poems in the Temple of Time? Like, what could they say?
They look like poems. Like they straight up look like poems on the walls, and it's
Absolutely.
Like, so these are like mantras or phrases that must mean something. It's wild. But what really gets me is fans cracked the Sheikah language before Breath of the Wild came out.
Yes, I saw that.
And I was part of the team on Shrine Celtic that were like going over this like high resolution photo of the tapestry that they showcased at, I think it was like an E3 or like a Nintendo Treehouse, something of that nature, back in like 2016, early 2017. And it was,
I remember watching it on Zelda's channel.
it was just on the back. It was on the back of a map of Hyrule.
Yeah.
From like the collector's edition that they were talking about.
And they just turn around. It's like Miyamoto just like turning, or Aonuma just like turning around a picture. Like he's like holding like a thing. He turns it around. It's like the most low poly, like low quality image. And like they're like the people in the community zoom and enhance. You know?
Zoom and enhance. And that's exactly what we did.
Yeah.
And we started looking at it and like obviously comparing with some of the other instances that we've seen of the language.
97% accuracy, right? Like 98%.
It was nutty. It was ridiculous. We had at least we had determined that it was an English cipher, so it had all of the English alphabet from A to Z, and we started working on like what specific symbols seem to mean what sound or what letter. And we were getting specific words, like we got the word Hyrule, we got the word Sheikah, we got the word Hylia, but then the rest of it seemed to come out as gibberish until we started really looking, and it turns out that yes, it was an English cipher, but the Sheikah tapestry was written in like Nihon Shiki Romanji. So that is not Hepburn style, which is what we would typically see for a Romanized form of the Japanese language in the West.
Yes.
But like specifically like Japanese elementary school Romanji.
Yeah.
That's what they were writing this in. So
it became like super easy because like I remember watching that video back in 2017 or 26 when it like right before the game came out.
Yeah.
I mean, it was essentially
right
like
before the game
right
came
before
out.
the game came out. I was so bummed because I was like that seems like the entire story, isn't it? Wow.
But then it turns out, you know, when the game came out, that was just the backstory.
Yes.
That was the events of 10,000 years ago. So like
they saw how quickly people solved this and they said, okay, bet. And so they gave us something way harder. Cause like, I think that's why it must have changed right before release. Cause like
before release, because I'm like, I don't see how else that would have changed. Right. So like around the same time that the art book leak was out and we were really trying to crack down on solving this language.
How hard would it be to literally just put a code in that like takes the letters and just like, because you already have the assets loaded in, right? Like you already have each letter of the textures loaded in. So how hard would it be to just be like, okay, now 2 now means 8, you know? So like that's a simple coding thing. Like I say simple, but like that's something that can be thrown in last second without any graphics having to be updated. Without, because like maybe they realized like maybe before it came out, they were like, shit, because like I'm sure they watched the internet, right? Like they have to.
Oh, absolutely. So that's what I was gonna say. Like just before the game released and just around the time the art book leak was big, for that brief period that it was all over Reddit and people were trying to talk about it on Twitter, Nintendo started cracking down on like everybody.
Everything.
So they were clearly aware of what was happening. They were clearly aware, and they must have seen some of the trends of like, okay, people are starting to look at this and they're starting to work on this.
These nerds are deciphering our language too quickly.
Again.
So, throw a cipher in. They can't know what the language means.
That's where my
It could be a double cipher just to totally screw us over, you know, like, because you could have, you know, what it says and then translate it to more.
You solved what this says, but now we've rearranged it. It's a cipher on a cipher, cipherception.
They literally could just take the ZONAI language, scramble it up, make that the new thing, scramble it up again, make that the new thing, and just to mess with people. Like, that's how in-depth they can make this, because, you know, everybody likes a good cipher.
Yeah.
And this seems like something that people are really, like, so many people have just accepted. They relegated themselves to be like, well, it just can't be cracked. It's impossible. They're not real.
Nothing's impossible.
They're not real
Nothing
words.
is impossible when it comes to this kind of thing. Like, as a community, we have done it before, right?
So many people are convinced that these aren't even real words. They're like, it has to just based on my analysis, it's just a bunch of scrambled, meaningless symbols, just to look cool. Like,
and that's where I disagree, and I'm
like,
like,
with you.
man, you don't even know. Like I said, we cracked it. We were like 99.9% sure that we had cracked it.
I remember reading them and I was just like, yeah, seems legit. Yeah.
Seems legit. Like, it was just, everything was making sense.
I mean, I was of course skeptical to an extent. I was just like, yeah, I mean, like, seems legit. We'll see. We'll see whenever the game comes out. You know,
and that's how we felt. Like, we were like,
that's how everybody
damn,
felt.
like this makes sense. It's, you know, it's finally making sense. This really seems to check out. Hopefully this holds true and we can read more. We'll use this key, we'll use this cipher, and we can understand more. And if we can actually get more like story points that make sense based on the context, like, this would be it. Like, we'd have it. This would be the gravy. This would be the moneymaker. This would be the key to solving it all. But then they went and changed things up, and it's like, well, shit.
I guess not. And then, like, why do you consider the stuff that's like on the pillars and on the light roots not a language? Because I've seen a lot of people bring up they think that's a language too.
On the light roots,
kind of like it's low poly, but it kind of looks like there's writing there, and it looks like the stuff that's on the pillars, that on the temples usually, and like the Temple of Time pillars. It's like those symbols that kind of like
the repeating sort of patterns that they use to make a bunch of the artwork.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing. Me personally, I don't see that as like a written word so much as just, I was
thinking maybe like a prayer,
an art,
like a prayer over and over again.
Maybe a prayer. Maybe it's like they're symbols, obviously. They
like
have
they're
some
spoken
meaning,
kana
but I don't
kind of thing too.
Yeah.
Like they could have like a spoken written version of their language, maybe like that they said their prayers out. I don't know, man. Like, I don't know.
But in my mind, like, the fact that they are so, like, it seems to be the same sequence of symbols that are used to make different patterns. Either on,
I'd agree to that. Yeah.
Either on the exterior, like as an outline, or creating like an intricate face, or, you know, like as a border.
Yeah, I was gonna say on borders is where I've seen it most.
I can't see that being words. They have a meaning. Absolutely, they have a meaning. But I don't think they like spell a word out, or they don't spell a phrase out. It just seems like something sacred but decorative, in my opinion.
I just thought of this, but have you considered taking the chant that they say over and over again and trying to break it down phonetically and then like putting it into this alphabet? I just thought of this. I was like,
I had not, but
consider. I don't know. Like, I don't know this stuff, but like, I just thought of that because we were talking about the repeating patterns. And it's like, they do just kind of say that one prayer like out loud over and over again. I wonder if the language. Anywho, thank you, Lorulean, for joining me. This was fun. Had a good time.
It was.
I learned a lot, and you know,
Good.
I appreciate
I'm glad.
you
I'm glad.
sharing.
I'm glad to have been here. I'm happy you reached out and you wanted to learn a little bit more about
Bro,
this
what do you
process.
mean? Always. Always.
Yeah. Yeah.